Hello, everyone. We were just talking about White Lotus. I don't want to give any spoilers out for anyone, so I'm going to stop that conversation. But we're going to give people a couple of minutes to filter in. I see people joining us now. Hello, my name is Brett Starr. I'm the founder and CEO of the Starr Conspiracy. We are an experience agency, primarily serving work tech. And that could be a long conversation, like what is work tech? But we can talk about that. And I am very honored to be joined today by Jeff and Steve. And Jeff, I'll give you the honors of introducing yourself, and then I'll talk about this other guy that I've worked with for a while.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks again for having me, Brett. Jeff Gelinas with Engage to Excel. I've been with the organization for 7.5 years. So we'll hit the 8-year milestone next summer. Spent most of my life in work tech. So I was just chatting with Brett a minute ago about the brass ring days, which became part of Connexa, and then IBM, joined Engage to Excel in 2015. So Engage to Excel is really focused on helping organizations attract, engage, retain their talent. We do that through our career experience platform, which is really unique in the marketplace in terms of helping companies find and keep. A lot of times in the space, you get companies that focus on one or the other, but we're really focused on helping companies find and keep their talent. Excited to be here. I'm located just north of Boston in New Hampshire, and appreciate the opportunity.
So glad you're here. You're the president of recognition and engagement. And I'm curious what the president of recognition and engagement gets as recognition for 8 years.
Well, it didn't start that way. So it started off in product management, and then morphed into taking on marketing and creative and other departments. So took on the role of president a couple of years ago, and it's been an honor. We have a great team at Engage to Excel. And I feel privileged to work with such talented people.
I feel privileged to be speaking with you today. And I want to throw it over to Steve Smith, my longtime business partner for about 80,000 years. Steve.
Brett.
Introduce yourself, man.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Steve Smith. I am partner and chief marketing officer of the Starr Conspiracy. I'm very happy to be here talking to Jeff.
Yeah. So we, as is tradition, we like to start with a moment of gratitude, say something we're grateful for. And I usually have a drink of choice. I've noticed increasingly since we're, a little bit further from, the thick of the pandemic, that fewer people are actually bringing alcohol to the table in our fireside chats, but that's okay. I'm not judging. Don't judge me. But I am going to be opening an old school Miller Lite today for my drink of choice. And I want to say that what I'm grateful for today, and we're going to be talking a lot about this, but this is this is not like a commercial. I'm really grateful for the work tech industry. When we started the Starr Conspiracy and made the strange decision to focus on what we used to call HR software, and then just became all these different variations leading up to what we now call work tech. I thought at the time there was about a $200 million investment in 2001 in the HR software category. And I thought, holy cow, $200 million invested in a single, kind of startup category. And of course, I'd later come to find that there's all these companies that Jeff can tell us about who've been around for like 100 years, right? But I was like, this is going to put food on our table forever. We never have to, get outside of HR software. And then, flash forward to the year 2023, and in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been like $60 billion invested in work tech. We literally have an order of magnitude more work tech companies in the world now than we did, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I'm so grateful for the space, not just because of the opportunities it's provided for myself, my colleagues, and my family, but also because I feel every day when I show up to work that the work that I do is important in terms of the impact that it has on the world. I think that we are all in a unique position where because of what we get to do every day, whether we're a work leader in HR or whether we're, working for an employee experience company or someone in work tech, that we are actively trying to make people's lives better every day. So I'm deeply grateful for all the people in work tech and just all the people and experiences I've had along the way. And here's to that. And I will pass it to you, Jeff.
Awesome. Mine's a bit of a twofer. So number one, my health. There are a lot of people around me today that are not well. It is cold, flu season, still dealing with COVID. In fact, I was thinking to myself, I hope I don't get anything before this fireside chat, because it's the time of year to socialize and get together. And there is a lot going around right now. So I am grateful for my health. There are a lot of people sick right now. So I'll definitely cheers to that. And then again, just a wonderful team that I work with at Engage to Excel. I'm proud of what we do as an organization, proud of the team that we've built. So again, just hats off to our team that, just pours their heart and souls into servicing our customers who are amazing. So again, lots of gratitude, a bit of a twofer.
You're here.
And cheers to, I have a soda water.
Sounds good to me. Steve Smith.
This is going to sound a little weird, but I'm actually grateful for adversity. I think that this has been a more challenging year than many of us would have preferred to have if we were going to order something up. But adversity really teaches you who you are. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot more than you would. I've learned, maybe I'm unusual, I've learned a lot more from difficulty and failure than I ever did from success. So I think that these are good experiences. It keeps you humble and it keeps you learning. And so I'm grateful for adversity, and I'm going to cheers that with good old fashioned water. Hydration is important, out of my IKEA pint glass. I'm not sure what this is called in the catalog, if it's Schmerge or something along those lines, but
Very nice.
Post.
Yeah. So Jeff, you've been in work tech for a long time. We're going to talk about Engage to Excel, and I want to definitely talk about the very interesting combination of products and services that y'all put together at Engage to Excel, because it really is kind of very divergent from what the typical, kind of model looks like for expansion in that segment. But this isn't your first rodeo. You've been in work tech for a long time. Prior to the brass ring days and all that stuff, you were in staffing and in HR and stuff like that. So how did you get into this world? What's been your journey?
I was very fortunate enough early on to meet somebody in the HR world who introduced me to some contacts right out of school. Actually, I started out in public relations for a little bit, wasn't sure what I wanted to do, went into recruiting in the contingency staffing world for about a year or so. Figured out that I really wanted to have more impact in the world of HR. So then took my first role at Brass Ring, but it was really through connections that I got into HR. It was not a planned path. Studied international relations in college. So HR just sort of found a home in HR and really loved it, because I felt like it was a great mix for me in terms of, building relationships, but also really getting into the business side of, what the organization does. So it was a great marriage early on, but wasn't really planned, and grateful for the amazing ride I've had in work tech.
Well, in Brass Ring, a lot of people on, this for the purpose of this series of fireside chats we're bringing in some of the legends of work tech who have been, around for a while and have been through downturns and, really significant moments of expansion. And there's a lot of people who join us on these podcasts who don't really know a lot of the early history, and it's not like we would expect them to, right? It's not like a super compelling novel or something like that. But Brass Ring was one of the first applicant tracking systems. It was part of a cohort of the first wave of applicant tracking systems, built in the era of when software as a service was becoming a thing, when cloud was becoming a thing. And how many applicant tracking systems must have there been back then? Because I can think of like 20.
Yeah, there were a couple dozen. Yeah, and several of them became part of the Connexa family. Connexa acquired Brass Ring, but yeah, they were definitely in abundance back then. There was a lot of competition. We would compete against the Teleos of the world at the time. That got bought by, of course, Oracle. So I mean, it was pretty fierce at that time.
Yeah, and were you with Brass Ring prior to the acquisition?
Yep, about 6.
And then you were there when IBM acquired Connexa, which was part of that kind of like, triple crown acquisition of, like SAP buying SuccessFactors and Oracle buying Taleo and Connexa buying Brass Ring. And then that's how you got into the IBM world. And then it's just been a process of, just like creative reinvention going back to like 2001 in terms of the emergence of this category. So what's changed for you from a work tech perspective? I mean, being literally on the ground floor of, kind of the first software as a service work tech solutions to where you are now. What have you seen change in that time?
Oh boy, I mean, technology has changed so much. I mean, when I think back to Brass Ring, we had a group of people. Just think about this: at the time when paper resumes were coming in, there were like contingency staff, like part-timers, moms, people that would parse these resumes and enter them into a database, and we'd have like hundreds of them on demand to tackle these paper resumes that would come in. I mean, technology has changed so much, right? And so that's been, I think, the biggest thing is to see, a lot of the technology shifts from those early days. I was fortunate enough a little bit later in my tenure with IBM Connexa to work on the product management side and really influence Brass Ring and the talent acquisition suite at the time as a more mature product. But I think that's the biggest thing is just the amount that you can do now within a product, given the advances in technology. It's been profound.
It's funny you should say that, because when I was at Deploy, two funny stories real quick about Southwest Airlines. So we closed, what was a monster deal back in the day. And we had the same thing. We had this big room where there were just like boxes and boxes and boxes of resumes that were being manually entered into the system. So yeah, that technology component has obviously advanced significantly over that time. But the other thing I remember is, Southwest Airlines was a Dallas company, and we were in Boston. They all came up to Boston, and it was the first time that they were meeting, the Deploy Solutions team face to face. And all these, big Texas folks come in and start hugging everybody in the office, and everybody in Boston was like, "Why are they hugging me?" It's just, yeah, very interesting to see. Of course, we think about, the cultural differences, between organizations and like different countries and stuff like that. But Steve and I have traveled all around the world together, and we've traveled all inside the U.S. together. And the business cultures are really different from, state to state, from the East Coast to West Coast, from Texas to, Iowa.
Absolutely.
And it was just a really fun cultural moment.
I think the other thing too, Brett, is just when you think about the amount of kind of second, third, fourth generation buyers now. I mean, you had a lot of first generation buyers at the time, so they were really getting their feet wet with the technology. And in fact, when I joined Engage to Excel back in 2015, it felt like a little bit more like going back to my Brass Ring days on the recognition and reward side, where you had a lot of first-time buyers. But now, with these types of solutions becoming more ubiquitous, you don't encounter as many, first-time buyers, especially in the space that we're in. You're seeing second, third generation, and a little bit of feeling maybe burnt or jaded, like they didn't get what they wanted from that experience. And so that's been kind of interesting to see as well.
Yeah. So Steve, you and I used to talk about this all the time. We used to tell clients, this was back in the day when it was the first time buyers, right? And that was most of the market. and we'd run into a lot of, founders of work tech companies who really hated the target market that they were selling to. And we would always say, like, if you don't like your buyer, then you're in the wrong market. Steve, how has that changed in terms of just like the level of sophistication and people's approach, to selling into, HR people, work leaders, et cetera now?
I think it has changed. I mean, that dynamic certainly still exists. I believe that you still run into companies, founders that's just their default position. They don't want to sell into HR. They want to sell into the C-suite.
Yeah.
They don't believe they really have an HR solution. And I think that some of that is beginning to thaw just with the emergence of, strategic CHROs and chief people officers. And just, I think that the respect that those individuals earned throughout the pandemic, when they became the chief COVID officer, essentially. And I think one of the interesting shifts also is, I saw this in a press release recently from somebody announcing the hire of a chief human resources officer, saying that this person was, the CHRO is the moral compass of the organization. And so I think that shift has changed the buying dynamic some, just the fact that, okay, these are true, C-level officers, but I think that there's still way too much of that, contempt for your buyer that, I'm surprised it still exists, but it does.
Yeah. Jeff, y'all have a very, kind of platform oriented solution that, hits a bunch of different, components that if you put it on an org chart, might hit a bunch of different areas of HR, talent, the whole like umbrella under HR. Do you find that when y'all are putting deals together, and I want to ask you about RFPs as well in a moment.
Yeah.
But when y'all are putting deals together and talking to clients, I mean, is it still an HR centric sell, or are there more people on the executive team involved now? How does that look?
Absolutely. In fact, the number of people that are getting involved in deals has grown significantly. You have a lot of committees making decisions. I think, my goodness, one deal over the fall, I think there were 35 people on the phone.
Wow.
For our final pitch. It's definitely grown in terms of the number of stakeholders involved.
Yeah. And so going to the question on RFPs, we've noticed, I think, a pretty seismic shift in the way that RFPs are coming together over the past, couple of years. So go back to, 2019. And it was a very, and I remembered something else I want to ask you, so I'm going to try to remember that. It was a very organized market. It was very, Gartner could draw the little boxes and say this vendor goes here and this vendor goes here. And a lot of RFPs were very feature and function oriented, and people kind of knew what they wanted. And a lot of RFP processes were basically just, do you have this or do you don't?
Check the box. Yep.
Yeah. And I've seemed to notice a drift in RFPs now where, I'm exaggerating here, but an RFP will show up and just say, this is what we're trying to achieve from an organizational goal perspective. What you got? Because it's almost like people are, reorganizing their view of what their organizational goals are based on their experience during the pandemic. And it seems like a lot of the RFPs are a lot more open-ended now. Is that happening to you guys?
I think it's a mix. You do still have some of those check the box type responses, but you're absolutely right. We've had some that have been on the surprisingly short side where they really wanted us to elaborate and tell our story, talk about how we can help solve their problems with the solutions that we have. So absolutely. And we've seen an uptick in the second half of this year in RFPs. So we actually had double the amount of RFPs in the second half than the first half. So I know we talk about downturn, preparing for the downturn, but we had a really strong second half, and we've been fortunate enough to advance in 92% of those RFPs. So it's been very successful.
That's awesome. Well, you also gave me a great segue into our first poll. how is the current downturn impacting your company? Jeff is saying that they're on a roll. Curious to know how other people feel about that. I'm going to let that run in the background for a moment. But I remembered something else I was going to ask you from back in the brass ring days. Because Steve and I have talked a lot on these fireside chats, but we always talk a lot in general about organizing principles and how big changes can create a lot of division on two sides of a fault line. And so, the whole category that brass ring occupied was really created by the emergence of software as a service. Yeah. And it seems like back then that there were people who were trying to preserve leadership, meaning vendors who are trying to preserve leadership by attacking the new organizing principle and saying, don't go to the cloud. Don't go to the cloud. It's scary. You want to have an on-premise solution. They're going to steal all your data and, check the contract really closely. Do you remember that the same way?
Yes, I do. 100%. You're very accurate. It was a way to combat, it was, again, a very competitive market at the time. So there was a lot of tactics to try to thwart the competition.
Yeah. And it seems like a very similar thing is happening right now, Steve. How would you kind of describe that relative to what Jeff is saying? Do you see a similar thing going on right now?
In terms of
organizing principle, people lining up on both sides of it. Some people coming out and arguing against, this notion that maybe work has changed. And, there's another group saying, no, we really just need to kind of get back to the way things were.
Yeah, some of it is just, I think of what we do with work tech, a lot of it is kind of like situated around like hybrid versus remote versus back in the office. But what I'm finding really interesting is how work is changing because of AI, and how I was just reading a Harvard Business Review article about this, about, when you look at like, Chat GPT and Dolly and some of these other generative AI solutions that are coming into the workplace, just how fundamentally that's going to change work. And I think that, those of us who work in technology are like, oh, we are software engineers and we develop code and we're writers and strategists and we do all this abstract thinking, and technology can never disintermediate us. And I think that that's just wrong. I think that a lot of what we think is core to the work that we do on a daily basis, we're going to look back in 10 years and be surprised with how much things have changed and how much AI and technology have kind of come into play. But there's people who don't want things to change at all.
Well, I always think about the WeWork CEO. That's my favorite example. Who was just grilled online for coming out and saying, how to tell if an employee is not engaged if they don't want to come back in the office. Well, why would the WeWork CEO be saying that? It's obviously in their best interest to have people return to the office. So, Jeff asked me earlier if we were going to run the same polls that we did in kind of this previous series. And I said, yeah, because I like to see how it changes. And it is going week to week right now. So, Steve, if you remember last week, we asked this question. There was a bunch of people in like the absolute nightmare, tightening our belts a bit. And now it's just like right in the middle of playing it cool, no cuts, no increases, or tightening our belts a bit. And I can't help but think, it's like everybody is so tuned in to the economy right now that the news that we get on, any given day, has a deep impact. So Jeff was saying, we got the, before we jumped on, we got the new inflation data today. I think it was at 7.1%, it's decreased for 6 months in a row. What, Steve? Come on.
Who thought that you'd get excited about, hey, there's new producer price index data coming out. Wow, this is exciting.
But I can feel it. Like I can see it and feel it like on a daily and weekly basis. Like people are really tuned in.
100%.
Yeah, more than I've ever seen at any point in my life. Like, like my daughter who's 11 years old is talking about economics. And there's just like, kids are talking about like what's going on with the economy. I've never seen anything. I don't know if that's just because like the media cycle is so much more, pervasive than, it was in even the global financial crisis or whatever. There are a lot of interesting things to look at, but I just feel like I don't know, maybe we're just very like reactive because of our experience over the last 3 years, that if we see something in the news, it has a direct and immediate impact on our mood. I don't know. But people seem to be in a better mood today than they were last week. Geez.
7.1%. Yeah.
Yeah,
Only
to celebrate.
yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, well, let's not get stuck on that one for too long. So engage to excel. You talked a little bit about this in your introduction. You have just a very interesting, kind of lineup of products. So, like just as a person who observes the space a lot, I get recognition, and I get recognition being combined with engagement measurement, with surveys and the services associated with that. The curveball for me has always been recruitment. And it's so interesting because y'all have carved out such a differentiated position in the space based on the fact that y'all bring all this stuff together into your CXS platform. I think that also you've created a very kind of unique position around this notion of career experience. So how did that happen? Because surely somebody at some point must have said these things don't go together, and y'all were like, no, they go together.
Yeah, it's interesting because we had a vision early on, even our CEO, Phil Stewart, joined the company in 2015. I joined shortly after that. Again, at the time, the business was primarily recognition and rewards. And, we saw opportunity right away because, we didn't want to focus on just, and being in HR, you want to impact the whole journey. And when you can, and it's definitely frustrating for recruiters as well when they recruit somebody and they pour their heart and soul into it, but they have no impact over that individual's onboarding experience and experience at the organization. It can be disheartening. And so, having been in the HR world, having spent a lot of time in this space, I knew that if we focused on those moments that matter throughout the life cycle, that there would be something there, and that. Certainly, to your point around RFPs, they don't always start that way. Oftentimes it starts out as a single category, but we always tell the whole story of what we do around finding and keeping. And people love hearing about that. They love that we're connecting the dots, because the single biggest problem I've always had with employee experience, I know that's the most common phrase in terms of describing the experience, but it sort of leaves out, part of the experience. So when we think about the candidate experience, new hire experience, the manager experience, the alumni experience, to us, it's just all that career experience. And I know that HR likes to kind of put things in buckets, onboarding, performance management, recognition. But as an individual going through that journey, it's really just a seamless, continuum. There aren't really these silos, so to speak. And so we've really focused on how do we improve that journey throughout the life cycle. To your point around, it is a bit different in the industry. I think you're right. We have a lot of category competitors that we go up against that really don't do the before hire part of what we do. So that's what makes us unique, but certainly stands out as we tell our story early on.
So just to take because I want people to understand this, because it's really interesting, and I want to make sure I have it right as well. When you talk about the recruitment component, there's like an RPO component as well, right? So there's a services base, like we're going to do this hiring for you, either like project RPO or as like an ongoing, service relationship. But don't you also make recruitment technology available to your clients? Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
we have recruitment technology that was really built by recruiters for recruiters, and that is offered up as well. That's our CXS Recruit offering, which is really a combination of technology and service together.
Yeah.
And really the glue between the two is the onboarding. The glue between recruiting and the recognition and rewards is that pre-boarding and onboarding phase, which, depending on what type of buyer you have, can resonate very, very well. We've seen an uptick in the solutions that we offer to really help engage new hires before day one. That time between offer acceptance and first day on payroll, that is a slippery time period. And we've got solutions that can really help engage, motivate, acclimate individuals to the culture.
So one of the, and sorry, Steve, I'm hogging the airways here, but I have so many questions. Yeah, shocking, right? Sorry, make fun of me. So like one of the innovations here is that basically you then take the engagement measurement product and the recognition and rewards product, and you're able to extend that into like the pre-employment area, right? Like you can like use surveys around someone's, candidate experience, for instance. Like you have, it's not just that you have these three things and you can use them, it's that they cannot like all layer over each other, right? Like if
Absolutely. And in the world of survey, you've definitely seen a pretty big uptick in life cycle surveys. So being able to really understand that voice of the individual at the time of hire, the time of exit, ad hoc initiatives, et cetera.
So two things about that then. The first one I can remember, the second one I'll see if I can remember. How often do you go into a deal where you're talking about recruitment exclusively, or you're talking about recognition exclusively, or you're talking about engagement measurement exclusively, and then you say, oh yeah, and it integrates with recruitment and all the other stuff? And how frequently does that tilt things in y'all's direction because people are craving more integration between those functions?
100%. So it often starts as, like I mentioned, a more of a category type interest, and then morphs into, well, we are consolidating, and this is of interest to me, and this is of interest to me, and can we bring these pieces together? That becomes a really interesting value proposition. And so no matter what type of opportunity is, we're always making sure that we're telling the full story. It may not be that they want to necessarily put those things together right away, like that second, but the promise of future value is something that, is of interest to buyers, because they're trying to streamline and consolidate, reduce the number of partners they're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of curious, Jeff, in terms of like one of the dynamics now that you just touched on was just this whole kind of like, consolidation element. And you're able to do kind of, disparate things that maybe, buyers have not thought about putting together. As you're coming into deals, are you finding that there's more opportunity to expand with current customers because, hey, they're a recognition customer this year, and then 2 years down the line, it's just like, hey, let's talk about RPO? Or
100%. Yeah, 100%. And sometimes, to your point, the stars may not always align in terms of when contracts are ending, maybe with other providers, but certainly as they look at that time frame out, they start to put their thinking cap on and say, okay, wow, I could really consolidate a lot of these things under one roof. And to your point, Brett, really kind of get the data around it all in one platform.
But it seems like right now, onboarding, is such a pain point for a lot of companies, because even just, if they're able to like, source and hire the right candidate, there's that kind of in between time that you're talking about where maybe they get another job offer from somebody, or, you're worried about them getting poached by someone even after you've got them to agree to a job offer. It seems like because you're putting together, the acquisition component and the retention component, you probably have a pretty good story to tell around retention as related to the onboarding experience.
Absolutely. And our Trendicators data, we have a division of Engage to Excel called Trendicators, where we provide HR research and best practices. Our research tells us that 60% of candidates who have accepted a job offer will consider other offers if they don't hear from that company between offer acceptance and first day on the job. So you talk about that slippery period and how you can mitigate risk, we've got solutions to help do that. And they're more, kind of recognition and appreciation oriented. So for example, our welcome boxes have been a great hit, and we can deliver them to the individual's home right after offer acceptance. It actually is handled by the recruiter or admin with a simple check of a box that fires off in order that goes to an individual's home, which we amplified during the COVID period to make it more sensory. We thought about how we can add music. How do you add elements to it that make it more of a celebration? So I think COVID really forced us to think a little bit more about the packaging, activating the senses, with those types of solutions. So that's just one example. There's also a digital component of what we do in terms of being able to send the new hire, images, e-cards, videos, welcoming them to the organization. So these type of things, they go a long way. There's this feeling of, what is it going to be like to work there? Am I going to like the people? Am I going to fit in? When you introduce some of these things, it just really makes people feel welcome and included right away.
Wow.
Do you see like I want to follow that thread a little bit in a minute, because y'all do a bunch of really interesting stuff that really stands out from a CX perspective. But I'm curious, in moments like these where, a lot of people feel like we're in a downturn, a lot of people have a lot of fear and uncertainty about, the year that was 2022 and the year that is 2023, because of the way that your product portfolio is constructed. Do you see at different times that you'll have increased demand in one area and then, convert over to another area? Like, was part of the thinking around this, I get the big idea and why it all fits together, but was there also some notion of, kind of breaking this counter-cyclical, business model dependence, where it's like, if you're just a talent acquisition company, sometimes you're doing great and sometimes you're not. If you're just this or just that, sometimes you're doing great and sometimes you're not, depending on what's going on in the market. So do y'all see a lot of, variances or changing in demand based on different times?
We don't see a lot of variance. In fact, we've grown in, all areas. And even during COVID, we never really had too much of a downturn. Again, I think my message to a lot of people is figure out what you can do to be essential, right? Create essential services for your customer. And, we're fortunate to be in a business where the finding and keeping of talent is incredibly essential. I mean, even after the initial downturn of COVID, then there was hiring everybody back after the initial panic subsided. So we just really did not see too much of a downturn. But certainly, to your point, Brett, the diversity of the portfolio is always good. If there's something cyclical that's happening, it creates balance within the portfolio. So I would agree that it does help in that respect, but don't tend to see a lot of dips, even in recognition and rewards, Brett and Steve. You go back to the financial crisis, right? 2008, 2009. Certainly you saw eligibilities drop. That's a little bit more on the service milestone side. And there are some cyclical trends as a result of that. But it tends to be a very recurring business, because if you think about, what the impact is of taking away recognition and appreciation, it's huge. You don't want to cut people's salaries, lay off people, and take away the one thing that makes them feel very appreciated, within the organization. So it tends to be a very sticky business overall.
Have you seen? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Steve. No, I insist.
You kind of touch on the stickiness of recognition. It's interesting because some organizations look at, recognition rewards as really kind of a must-have solution, and some of them look at it as a nice to have. Since 2020, have you seen kind of a change in that dynamic of more organizations realizing why this is essential technology and why these are essential initiatives?
Yeah, I'll even take a step back a few years before COVID, because I think when I joined Engage to Excel, it was a lot of ROI was the big word, and it was how do you show ROI of your programs, your recognition and engagement programs. And I would say that, you know, now 7 years later, it's pretty much understood that these programs create value, and they are an important driver of retention. I don't think a lot of people doubt that. I think what we have seen since COVID, though, is an uptick in not just recognition around behaviors, values, actions, but that appreciation factor as well. I think there's been an uptick in appreciation because you now have individuals who are disconnected. They're a combination of in-office, remote, hybrid, and trying to create that connectivity, showing appreciation, I think is huge. So these factors have definitely created a lot of demand for these types of programs that we offer. Absolutely.
Well, I was doing a little snooping around before our conversation, and I noticed in one of the systems that we use to do our very surreptitious research that it would appear that the median tenure of the employees in Engage to Excel is just over 8 years. And so, just pause on that for a moment, because that's a kind of unusual situation. It's a pretty long median tenure. One question in 15 parts. How do you do it? What's the role of, kind of using your own philosophies inside your own organization in driving that kind of, bi-directional loyalty? And what impact do you perceive that having that employee experience has on your ability to create a great customer experience and a great shareholder experience? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I opened up by what I'm, expressing what I'm thankful for. We've got a great team, and I think they're a very passionate team. If you think about the solutions that we offer around, attracting, engaging, retaining talent, the people that want to work in this business are passionate about people. And that bleeds over in all that they do. I'm fortunate to have somebody on my team who is going to be celebrating 38 years next year. Actually started his first, job in Attleboro, Massachusetts, years and years ago, almost 38 years ago. So yeah, the tenure that we have among our employee base is amazing. And I think it starts with we have our trifecta, which is really our own principles that we follow, and it's living what we do, recognizing and rewarding those who earn it, and seeking new ways to solve problems. Those are the three statements that describe, us. And I think living what we do, using all of our own platform elements on ourselves, making sure that we are our own best example of what we offer, I think is something that our employees really appreciate, because it allows them to go out and speak very passionately about the solutions that we offer. So eating your own dog food, that's kind of number one. And that does bleed over into the customer experience. Absolutely. And then, you've got people who are passionate, they stay longer, they work smarter, they care more. That result of a lot less churn certainly has an impact from a shareholder perspective. So we're very blessed to have a great team. And I also think that just the nature of what we do attracts some very passionate people.
Well, so I'm curious then, within that overall context, how much has your focus on your own employee experience, how much does that make times like this easier to navigate? And this is a leading question, but does that give you an advantage and an ability to basically find opportunities in a downturn that other organizations don't because of the deep commitment that you have because of the work you've done here on
Absolutely.
EX.
Our company actually goes back over 100 years. We've been through a lot of tough times over the many decades. And if there's one thing about our workforce, it's that they're resilient. We have a very resilient workforce. I mentioned the trifecta earlier as kind of our, part of our employee experience. Number 3 is seeking new ways to solve problems. We invent, we reinvent. We find ways to be innovative. We find ways to make the best of tough times. I think back to the early COVID era when the world was turned upside down. And what did our employees do? They put their heads together, from the product teams to the marketing teams to the customer experience teams to the sales teams, to say, what can we do to make a difference? What is the human thing to do here? So some great examples of what we did early on. We started a Facebook page called Thank COVID Responders, where people could come to a community and thank those that were on the front lines. We put together pins for our, especially we have a lot of customers that have frontline workers. We're pretty diverse in terms of our industry coverage, but certainly a lot of healthcare, a lot of frontline workers that were, putting in a lot of work. And so we created United Against COVID pins to really show solidarity that we donated to customers. So that's just the type of organization we are. When things get tough, we put our heads together and think, what can we do to make a difference? It's a very kind, humble, passionate workforce that we have.
Well, we all have a tremendous amount of respect for how y'all responded, during the pandemic. And one of the things that, stands out to me is you said, hey, we all got together, marketing, sales, product, customer success. And we talked about what is the appropriate way to meet this moment. And it doesn't sound like, that your response was, we need to hammer down and start selling stuff. It was more, which, a lot of people did because they had numbers that they needed to hit. And, that's what they thought their approach should be at that time. And it ended up kind of violating, the expectation that they had set and, kind of their response to COVID and their employer brand and, or rather their brand, well, also their employer brand, but their brand and their marketing. But that level of integration that you had between all of the groups working together to forward, a singular customer experience, that cues up my next poll question. How integrated is your brand, marketing, sales, product, and customer success strategy? Because I often use that as an example of how organizations can stay true to the customer experience, even as business conditions change, if everyone's working together to forward the same vision in the marketplace. And I just think that y'all did a really, great job
Thank you.
during that period.
Thank you. We're very proud of that moment.
So, you've kind of hinted at this, but how long has your company been around?
Since 1892. It's hard to believe.
So is there any like dusty letter in an envelope somewhere that's like, in case of Great Depression, open and read? Like,
we've had to invent and reinvent. I mean, I think the move, when we rebranded as Engage to Excel in 2015, it was introducing new solutions. We said, you know what, we've got to really think differently about the way the world of work is headed, the types of solutions that buyers are going to crave. And we had an early vision of what we wanted to do. That kind of find and keep value prop was something that I remember talking about with Phil during the interview process when I joined the organization. So we knew what we wanted to do. It's definitely going well in terms of how we wanted to frame it. But to your point, it's a differentiated path in the industry.
Well, it looks like we've got a pretty wide distribution here of people who feel that they're CX team, if you will, is integrated at different levels. One of the points that I would just put forward, like as we go into 2023, and I'm interested in hearing from you, Steve, and you, Jeff, on this topic. 2023 presents a lot of opportunities based on what we've learned over the last 3 years and the experience that we've had this year. My greatest insight is, and what the advice that I would give for 2023 is that if your groups that fall under customer experience, brand, marketing, sales, product, customer success are all, if they're not all unified by a singular vision for the customer experience that you want to create, then you're going to create breaks in continuity. And I'll give you an example of, just a story that I hear over and over and over again. Oh yeah, our brand's great. Brand's performing great. Our marketing's doing great. We're driving tons of MQLs and SALs and tons of SQLs. Our product is fantastic, but for some reason, our salespeople just aren't performing. And our customer success function is a triage function. It's just, it's a hard position to keep people in because they're constantly putting out fires and dealing with unhappy customers. And the tendency is for people to say, we have a sales problem, we have a customer success problem. Let's go in and solve that, issue based on the people, the process, the systems, whatever it is, right? And upon closer examination, what it typically, ends up being is that what's promised in brand and what's promised in marketing is different than what's delivered in the product. Even if the product is great, it's just being positioned in a different way, and the salespeople get caught in the middle. They get caught between the brand positions that brand and marketing are put out in the marketplace and the actual product experience. And so they've got to hit their numbers, right? So at some point they're going to start trying to, euphemistically adapt their narrative to try to ease that transition that sometimes results in throwing customers over the fence to customer success. And these buyers have come in with a very specific set of expectations. Product may be great, but it doesn't deliver on the expectations that were set. And that's where that break in continuity, comes from. It's not actually a problem with sales. It's not a problem with customer success. It's a lack of continuity in the entire CX vision. And I think that we're moving into a period where everyone kind of has their blocking and tackling in place in terms of what does good marketing look like? What does good brand look like? What does good sales execution look like? Et cetera, et cetera. But blocking and tackling is not enough anymore. This is an incredibly competitive space that gets more competitive all the time. And you have to go beyond the blocking and tackling to really create continuity in the CX and to create defining moments in each of those subdomains of CX so that you rise above the competition. So, Steve, any advice for 2023 and what you see coming down the pike?
Well, it's not the same in every category, but there's definitely a dynamic that you're starting to see. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about warnings coming out from Salesforce and from Okta and some of these other enterprise software players saying, yeah, sales cycles are getting drawn out, decisions are being delayed. Number one, I think it's about what can you do to expand share of wallet from existing customers? People still have pain points. They still, need to, buy solutions. How can you basically take the path of least resistance and go find additional problems to solve for your current customers? So that's number one. I think number two, just kind of looking broadly at, we're living in a time of change, and it's easy to say, hey, I wish it was like 2021 again, where, it's just like, the cash register was ringing and everything seemed easy. Or if you're a CEO, I wish it was like 2019 again, when everyone was in the office. And it's just like, I think that market dynamics have changed. I think work dynamics have changed, and you can either fight it and wish that, things could go back to the way they were, or you can live in the world that we're really in and adapt and change. So I think that, big number two is just to challenge yourself to, understand the changes and understand how you need to adapt.
Yeah. Going back to, the turn of the century, you can either fight the cloud or you can get in the cloud, right?
That's right.
So, Jeff, giving you the last word, I did it again. I was trying to leave time for questions, but I took us all the way to the end because I can't shut my mouth. What's your advice 2023? And I'll ask this in two directions. So to, work tech vendors out there, what's your advice in terms of, just kind of executing through what the next year is going to bring? And then what's your advice to work leaders and people leaders around, opportunities to be found in 2023?
Yeah. So I guess to tackle the one around vendors first, I think, to your earlier point around getting the internal teams in sync, rowing in the same direction, that's really important. Bring teams together and make sure that the messaging is clear, that the communication is clear. It's really, really important, I think, in this fast changing time. I think also experimenting too. So, we've done a lot of, even on the marketing side, a lot of A/B testing to figure out what's working, what's not working. To your point around there's, the news of the day. I mean, just, you really have to be in tune with what's going on and making sure that your marketing is appropriate and relevant in what you're doing. So I think those are a couple, and then don't be afraid to take risks. So I think in your first fireside chat, you and Mike talked about, kind of breaking the script. One of the things that we do every year that gets us a lot of attention at HR Tech is our kitty corral. We bring our kitties to the booth. We promote cat adoption and rescue. It just puts so many smiles on people's faces because they don't expect to come to a booth and get a chance to hold and pet kitties. So do something different, and don't be afraid to take risks. I think to, the practitioner audience, I would say embrace change. I mean, to your point, Steve, I mean, you can't fight it. The world has changed. Continued focus on flexibility. We've always been very flexible as a workforce. I mean, I've worked from home since I started I've actually worked from home for over 10 years. And so we as a company are very flexible, but continue to really pay attention to the needs of employees. It is a tough time right now with so much uncertainty. There is stress. And I think, showing compassion and flexibility is really important.
Well said. Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure. It was a great conversation. Steve, thank you. Look forward to your future success, Jeff.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I love the conversation, and I wish everyone out there happy holiday, a good break, some quality time for reflection as we head into a new year in 2023, and look forward to catching you on the next one. But once again, Jeff, thank you. It's been a real honor.
So long. Thank you.
Take care, y'all.